joint doctoral program in special education. I'm very honored to introduce Professor Dorit Ravid. So Dorit Ravid is my former professor from Tel Aviv University in Israel. She is a distinguished linguist and psycholinguistic who investigated the acquisition of Hebrew and Arabic as Semitic languages and the development of linguistic literacy in both typical and atypical populations. I first met Dorit 20 years ago when I enrolled in the introduction to linguistic course at Tel Aviv University. Her passion has inspired many, including me, to enter the field of linguistics. 5 years ago, Dorit was the one who encouraged me to begin my PhD. However, my life circumstances brought me here to Berkeley, and I hope that some days our paths would cross again. So, here it is. Then, earlier this year, I was excited to hear that Dorit would be on sabbatical at Stanford. I immediately contacted her, and fortunately, she accepted Lloyd's invitation, and she's right here. So, who is Dorit Ravid? It is not easy to summarize Dorit's impressive career in a few sentences, and because I don't want to forget any important details, I will read her formal biography word for word. Professor Dorit Ravid works at the School of Education and the Department of Communication Disorder at Tel Aviv University, Israel. Dorit is interested in understanding language learning as bound by cognitive, developmental, communicative, and language-specific typological properties. Her current work has two thrusts: the morphological and semantic distribution of content and function words in early childhood, and the development of spoken and written text production in different genres across the school years. Dorit is deeply committed to studying the causes and effects of a low socioeconomic background on the development of language and literacy skills. She has published 3 books and numerous articles on language acquisition and the development of linguistic literacy in Hebrew and Arabic. She is the authority on the topic of plural nouns in child Arabic. She has served as the Vice President of the International Association for the Study of Child Language, the Chair of the Israeli Association for the Literacy and Language, and the President of the Israeli Linguistics Circle. Her research findings are applied in Israeli educational context in the assessment of school children's literacy and language skills. So after this long introduction, please welcome Professor Dorit Ravid.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. It is really my pleasure to be here at Berkeley. This is the first time I think I've given a talk here, and the second time third time I've been here. And I'd like to walk you through this, I think, interesting project regarding adjectives. A little weird, somewhat weird, but you'll see. This is a project that has been carried out in collaboration with 2 dear younger colleagues, Amalia Baron and Ronit Levy, and with our MA student. And what was the overall aim of this study? We wanted a corpus of a reliably classified corpus of Hebrew adjectives, classified, you'll see, by morphology and register. The idea is exactly how to interconnect them. That might be informative of age of acquisition in the long run, and which will inform us regarding adjective acquisition and, in general, lexical knowledge. Now, the theoretical frameworks that guide my work are what is called today usage-based linguistics and psycholinguistics, construction grammar, cognitive grammar, and typological approaches to language learning and usage. I'm not going to go through it, but we can have a talk about it later on. Now, everybody knows that it's important to learn many words. So, of course, there are cognitive reasons, there are semantic reasons, but I'd like to emphasize that vocabulary is not only important for cognition, for semantics, but it's also important for the acquisition of syntax, since a phrase structure is based on content words. So you have noun phrases and verb phrases, and you wouldn't have them without words. And much of my work, not this work, shows that complex syntax is built upon words. And of course, there are practical considerations, because what we'd like to know is to know about age of acquisition of adjectives and other content word classes, but it's always difficult to choose items for tasks, for experimental tasks, because what we do is we choose what we know about, and we are not really informed about these items, so we need to motivate our selection of items. So I'm not going to talk about the tasks today, but about the process that has brought us to gaining a corpus from which we are going to construct these tasks. Now, why adjectives? I've been working on adjectives for as long as I can remember, because they're a nice compact window on the acquisition of the mental lexicon, especially in Hebrew, where morphology and lexical semantics work together. So it's a small group, and they, of course, modify nouns, so you need to know about nouns in order to you'll see, in order to talk about adjectives. So words such as pink and wise and shallow and interesting, hidden, they are all very interesting. They say something about nouns, and they have syntactic positions which really give you complex syntax. They participate in different syntactic constructions. And it's nice to know that they are not found as a class, whatever this means. In every language, for example, classical Hebrew did not have any adjectives. Now we do. Okay, you can ask me about it later on. And I can tell you from my work, especially in Vienna, with Professor Dressler, that they overlap in every language with about almost everything, every other category. So in Hebrew, verbs and nouns, they overrun adjectives all over the place. Now, in language development, this is a category which is, of course, noun dependent, and it sort of follows nouns and verbs in acquisition, may be impeded by nouns, may be helped by nouns, the work of Mintz, for example. Anyway, wherever you look, it's the smallest category, wherever you sample. And it's important, as I said, for complex syntax. I hope you can see. Now, in modern Israeli Hebrew, there is one dedicated category which ends with E, which are denominal adjectives. By the way, I decided not to give you full glosses of every single adjective I'm going to use, but I'll simply tell you. So, domi, southern, kavi, linear, mauti, inherent, etc. So historically, it has its roots in the Bible as nouns, and this category, in fact, blossomed during medieval times. And in order to acquire this category, you in fact have to know a lot about nouns, because the word beiti, of house, both means homemade and domestic, and it's not the same. It's like the old Bollinger example of a criminal type and a criminal lawyer, which are, of course, not the same. Okay. Now, apart from this dedicated category, which did not exist in biblical time, that just had its roots then, most adjectives, in fact, come from other classes, such as nouns, present participle verbs, for example, upholstered and repulsive and wonderful, etc., and noun patterns, such as, for example, washable. Okay, it takes some time to translate. So the study aims, again, you've already seen this, this slide, is to create a reliable corpus of Hebrew adjectives, and I'll show you how we tried to do that. So the first step was constructing the adjective lists. So we wanted to make a comprehensive list of the adjectives in Hebrew. That's a lot. So one option was for us to look at text corpora. And the advantages are, of course, that you have different communicative contexts, and you see the adjectives in their natural discourse environment, in their syntactic context, which is important, and you see them with all of their inflectional markers. and you can analyze them by type and token. This is wonderful. If we could do it, we would. The problem is that we have very different spoken and written corpora, and what people code as adjective is wildly different, okay? And we don't know how representative these corpora are of Hebrew. And finally, written texts are terribly holographic, which means you can read the same word in many, many ways. And unless you disambiguate, which takes years, you simply can't rely on the context. So for example, the word which might mean Lebanese, Lebanoni, might also mean sort of whitish. So you'd have to the diacritics, you have to have vowels, but you don't, okay? You can ask me about it later on. So our second option was to do it from the dictionary. Now the advantage is that there are also already selection criteria by a lexicographer, and you have a representative picture of structures and semantics from A to Z. Now the disadvantages is that these are based on the selection criteria by a lexicographer, because these people, they have all kinds of ideas about what's an adjective, what's a word, what's not a word. And you have only types, no tokens. That is just different adjectives, not their actual usage, okay? And there is no discourse content, and there is no syntactic context. And I can tell you that at least 1,000 adjectives might go missing when we do that. But, and there is of course no information on agreement phenomena. The good thing is that I have many other projects where we actually look at corpora. So this is what we chose to do. Now, question is, what do you include as an adjective in the dictionary? Because you couldn't just rely on what they have in the dictionary. There are, things which might be adjectives or might be nouns. There are color terms like khaki, okay? There is dedicated technological terminology which nobody might know. And there are also historical relics, words that I don't know. Like if the three people, three literate people don't know them, then okay. People make up lots of words in Hebrew, especially people who work in literature, writers. Okay. So we selected the second option, okay, with all of its problems. And we looked at everything marked as an adjective in a Hebrew dictionary. We excluded about 10% jargonistic, obsolete, ad hoc, so-called adjectives. This took us 1 year of work, terribly tedious work. And we also looked for missing entries. And we added several new adjectives, such as metukbak, talkbacked. Okay. And this is also something that we can discuss later on. This is an open-ended thing. It's like asking how many verbs that English have. Okay, we can go that way later on. So we have a list of about 3,700 adjective lemmas, that is different adjectives. I'm not claiming this is an exhaustive list of all Hebrew adjectives. What I can assure you is that they are all adjectives. Okay. And there are no syntactically determined adjectives here. That is, in Hebrew, a word such as metapes can be interpreted as climbing or climber or an adjective like a climbing plant. Okay, so it's not here. But for sure, they are all adjectives. Okay, and they are used in Hebrew. So that was how we constructed the list. Now we wanted some kind of scale. Something that we could work on that would give us some sort of hierarchy, some index maybe of word familiarity. This is a very, very thorny subject. So the frequency in text is often unreliable. There is new work by, for example, Cooperman and Van Dyke, which shows that. And the current annotated corpus that we have at Haifa University is really highly biased. From the 1990s, just one newspaper, Haaretz. For example, a word such as economical has a higher frequency than tall or high. So what does it mean? It means nothing. Okay.
It means they took it from the newspaper.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, that's right. No, I mean, like, it reflects it's from the 1990s. I mean, like, we couldn't work from that. We did a separate pilot study on that, okay? And I told you about homography. So we couldn't use frequency. Now, we thought of using morphology as a proxy for familiarity. In fact, I've been doing it for many years, and there are many studies by Ruth Berman, by myself, and some other people relating the morphological structure of adjectives to their age of acquisition or to their familiarity, if you wish. However, again, these are partial classifications, not always systematic, different corpora, tasks, etc. Question is, how valid are the scales that we've been using? So this was also for me kind of an aim, a goal. So morphology might be taken as a proxy marker of frequency and prevalence, but for example, so we thought of no structure, resultative, passive, nominal patterns, etc. based on child language observations. There's a paper that we published in 2010. However, the same morphological structures would host words which are really very rare, such as mach, which you learn only when you do crossword puzzles, meaning something like miserable. Okay. So each morphological class may contain different words. So I don't know how reliable, again, this morphology is as a scale. So what we did to begin with was take all of our adjectives, okay, all of the 3,800 sort of adjectives on the list, and classify them by 19 morphological categories, including, by the way, slang, which is not, of course, a morphological category, but we did include that. And there were all kinds of structures. You can ask me about them. If you want, I can elaborate. But for the time being, these are the structures that adjectives have in Hebrew. And eventually, what we want to do is to assess age of acquisition for these morphological categories, eventually. But then again, we still have the problem of how to index for familiarity, some sort of hierarchy. And then we thought about register. Now, why register? Now, people have found recently that subjective measures are just as good as frequency in corpora. And again, I recommend this wonderful paper by Cooperman and Van Dyke. And sometimes, as they say, corpus-based frequencies, they overestimate strength of words or representations. For example, all of these hapexes, single occurrences, they might be different. They might have different prevalence, despite occurring just once in the corpus. So what they say is that these capture experience-driven differences in word familiarity. So, in fact, I didn't know about that paper, but I had my own ideas, so we tried for them. Okay. So register, of course, has many definitions. Okay, many definitions. Again, it's a thorny subject. Ruth Berman and I published a paper in 2009 where we looked at what register might be in Hebrew, and we found that mostly it's lexical. It's like rarity, more or less, but of course this doesn't capture it. Also abstractness. So the vast bulk of items which have different linguistic register, higher language, you might say, lower language, whatever this means, they were lexical, but also bound. Morphology comes in here, of course, bound morphology doesn't come in here. The advantages of register judgments are, first of all, they are intuitive. So if I ask you, if I tell you what register is, and then I say, please, can you judge this word on a scale from 1 to 5, you are in fact trusting your own experience, and this is not related to morphology, so it's independent from morphology. It's a meta-linguistic assessment by experts, okay, by literate language experts. The question was how to find these experts. So here we come to the methodology. We conducted 2 pilot studies to define the population of judges, because what we started with was a list of 100 adjectives which were classified according to the whole classification, the representative of every morphological structure. And we asked literate people with university degrees to classify them by adjective. The term Mishlav Rishoni register is very well known to Hebrew speakers from elementary school, but there was terrible agreement among judges. I mean, there was terrible variability. There was no agreement. So we couldn't do that. That wasn't the right population. What we did was turn to the population of speech-language pathologists. In Israel, this is a highly select population. It's very difficult to get into university. There is a very high threshold. And this is I call them a learning-loving population. People who really know about language, keep learning throughout their careers. And they were very good for us. So what we did was we started with, we took all kinds of measures to see how many people had to judge how many adjectives. And eventually we reached them through Google Drive and Facebook. And there were 38 questionnaires, each containing 100 different adjectives. And we asked them for their information. And it went something like, hello, dear participant, we would be happy for your assistance in a psycholinguistic study of adjectives in Hebrew. Below you'll find a list of 100 adjectives. We ask you to classify them as you might see fit into 5 degrees by language register. And we wrote Mishlav Lishoni, language register. That is language level. We also use the term Amat Lashon. Please try to grade your list intuitively, similarly to the adjectives below. So 1 would be like basic or low language register, such as red or fat. And then we had things like brave, and then we had embarrassing, and then we had valid, and finally we had things like virtuose. What would you call it?
Virtuoso.
Virtuous.
No, not virtuous.
No, virtuoso.
A virtuoso, well, which in Hebrew would be, the reason I didn't want to translate is because of these problems, overlap. So, and mahuha, I don't even know how to say that, but these are words you will encounter once in a blue moon. And that worked. We had over 300 judges who filled in these 38 questionnaires, and they classified all of the adjectives. You see they provided over 32,000 judgments of adjective register. And they interacted with that. They told us what they thought of the project. And what we looked for was how much variability there was among judges, which is bad, and what are the register levels. So, never mind this, the multi-level cross-classification, multi-level analysis. But the nice thing was that we had 2 values, variability among judges, or if you wish, correlation among judges and among adjectives, which helped us assess the multi-level structure of the data. And to make a long story short, the computer came up with 7 latent classes, so we didn't determine them. This is what I was looking for, in fact. So computer came at us, the program came up with 7 latent classes of adjectives. So what you see at the top is the register score from 1 to 5, you see. So 2, and then going up to 4.5, and then going down. And below what you see is variability among judges, where the line goes up, this is bad. Okay, so we got rid of too small. You see, this is a distribution of the adjectives into these 7 register and agreement classes, where you have, for example, the green slice is like high register, high agreement. And I think it's the sort of bluish thing, middle register, middle agreement. So we got rid of the very low agreement, for example, that little slice, okay? And we came up with something really nice. We came up with, after we got rid of these little classes where there was no good agreement, okay, we came up with something that I called the 5 Hebrew adjective lexicons. So what do I mean by that? As you're going to see, I'm going to show you 5 different lexicons, starting from the superliterate lexicon, going down to the educated lexicon, mature, basic, and juvenile core lexicon. I'll explain about that. This is their distribution in terms of numbers, of proportions, in the 3,800 adjectives. So this is, I think, nice. So starting from the core adjective lexicon, neutral register, words such as hot, good, happy, healthy, empty. Then the basic adjective lexicon like poor and indifferent and upset and careful. And then the mature adjective lexicon. I'll go through them as you're going to see. So you see there the proportions that they take up in the entire lexicon. So for example, the superliterate adjective lexicon is like 11%. Whereas the educated adjective lexicon takes up 33%. I'll go through them. Now, so a word of caution. I hope you can see this is very important. A word of caution. So these are not the adjective lexicons as derived from child language. They are what educated, literate people who work with children, who are familiar with Hebrew, and whose judgment is not motivated by wanting to retain Hebrew purity, or they are very practical people. Okay, this is what they think it looks like. So this is the superliterate adjective lexicon. Now, the columns that you see, these are the morphological structures that are associated with each lexicon, and this is the nice, I think, gift or present that we received here, because what you're going to see is that there is an interesting interrelation between morphology and register. So the superliterate adjective lexicon, I thought to call it the lexicon of rare adjectives with high lexical specificity, which serve highly educated Hebrew users, you can say experts, with professional expertise. So these, this is what I would call the expert's adjective vocabulary. So most of them are like Oedipal, like Oedipal, administrative, amorphic, astrophysical, epidemic. It's not an accident. They're most foreign-based. Bacteriological, geopolitical, tectonic, and some other, Puritan, okay, compulsive, secondary, macrobiotic, etc. And some very, most of them are denominal, that is, they come from noun, but they are based on foreign stems. And some of them are based on resultative adjectives, passive adjectives, like, a very simple example would be like broken or hidden, but at a very high level, like administered. So, for example, winged from wing, or feathered from feather. Okay. And a few phrases. So this requires what I think broad and deep conceptual and terminological knowledge about also classical Hebrew, foreign languages, and you don't need much morphological knowledge to do this. You just need to stick an E at the end of a noun. Okay. So now we go down to, by the way, here the mean was 4.5 out of 5. Okay, that was the register level. Remember, 5 was the highest. Okay. So now we go down to, and and there were, this constituted 11% of all of the adjectives. So now we go down to the educated adjective lexicon, which constitutes a third of all Hebrew adjectives. and the mean is already 3.7. And what you can see is that we have more morphological structures. The columns go up. So these are lexically specific, morphologically complex adjectives serving literate Hebrew users. And these are words such as egocentric and cosmic and
Frivolous.
frivolous. Thank you. Please help me. I mean, like, it's so difficult to translate that I couldn't get like rational and I don't know how to say it.
Short-sighted.
Yeah, short-sighted. But you see, the problem with register is that register is not the same in the same language. You see, what sounds like, you know, like, let's say a basic adjective in English might be okay. Nominal and psychosomatic and pedagogical and barren, etc. Okay? So these, again, 40% are denominal. The rest have more structures. And this is the core, what I think the core adjective, literate adjective vocabulary, which requires a rich nominal lexicon and derivation of morphological ability. Now we go down to what I termed the mature adjective lexicon. We go down to 3.1. Again, close to 20% of the adjectives. You see more morphological classes cropping up. So this serves, I think, Hebrew speakers with functional literacy, maybe with more than functional literacy. I think maybe this would be taken as low literacy, so this is not what I mean. Okay. So this is what I would call elevated register, collected, Olympian, fictional, racist, genius, gynecological, abysmal. Well, abysmal sounds like, you know, okay, this is the reason I didn't want to translate. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, okay. Not all of them are adjectives in English. Okay. Okay, so again, we see many denominal adjectives, but also for the first time we see verb patterns which are not passive. And this is a vocabulary which is detailed enough to express properties, I think, of humans, of objects, of places, of concepts in the modern world, which is why we thought to call it functional literacy. Now we go down to the basic adjective lexicon, 2.5. I think you could call it a broad adjective lexicon shared by all Hebrew speakers with elementary education. Maybe today it's more than elementary education. And you see many more morphological classes coming up. Okay. And these are words like miserable and guilty and personal and certain and secure and blonde and preferred and urban. Okay. And this is the lexicon which is necessary to denote the main inherent properties of concrete and mental abstract nouns. And then we get to the juvenile core adjective lexicon of neutral register. I wouldn't want to call it low register because this is not like street talk. What you have here is in fact what Hebrew-speaking children, toddlers, hear and what they produce. I would say up to age 6 or 7 or 8. And you see that all of the morphological slots are filled, which is something we're going to discuss very soon. And it consists of about 6% of the adjectives, all of the adjectives that you would be familiar, like gray and real and healthy and cute, and sharp in the sense of taste, and strong and wise and hot, okay, and fat and broken and bad, hungry, etc. Only 10% are denominal and they are not really derived. You can ask me about them. And these are, I think, the prominent states and properties of objects and people. You know, colors, dimensions, shapes, basic reference, sensations and emotions, and of course modal adjectives, which are the first to emerge, like tzarich and nachon. Okay, so these are the 5 lexicons. Now, I'd like to discuss the relationship between the adjective lexicon, the distributions in the different register levels, and the morphological distribution of adjectives. And the question is, what is required to gain command of these lexicons if indeed they will be born valid by our tasks, which are under construction. So again, a word of caution. Yeah, these are of course based on the assessment of judges. And however, there was high inter-judge agreement, and we had strict statistical policy in examining the structure of the data. And by the way, the results I'm showing you are based on those adjectives which were found to be likely, 90% likelihood of occurring in each class. So it's even tighter, the statistical analysis. Okay. So this is the morphological composition of the Hebrew adjectival lexicon in terms of morphology. And I'm very happy about that because long ago I published a little paper in Hebrew in '87 regarding the number of denominals, you know, based on observations, intuition, whatever. And I came up with, say, 38%. Okay, so 38% are denominals. Those adjectives derived from nouns by the addition of E. And by the way, they are a later occurrence. They only start around to be produced spontaneously at age 7, and you can find them only from age 14 and upwards. And then you have verb patterns. Verb patterns, this is the machinery that drives Hebrew words. And then you have nominal patterns and some other things. So this is the distribution. Now, so this is what I said. What I thought before was that when you disregarded those adjectives that take the suffix E, like dati, religious, and you look at adjectives which share the pattern, the pattern with verbs and nouns, I thought that that would be half and half verb patterns and half noun patterns. But no, most of the non-linearly derived adjectives, they take verb patterns rather than noun patterns. So the major lexical machinery in Hebrew is like taking the present tense of a verb and creating an adjective or a noun out of it like an engineer. I think the nice finding regarding morphological structure is that the higher the register, the less morphological complexity or diversity. Or maybe I should say diversity rather than complexity, okay? Because this is not correct, because complexity means that the word is made up of different morphemes. And this is true of most Hebrew adjectives, except for very few ones, which are indeed in the Juvenile lexicon. But the more diverse, the more structures are found in the lower, so-called lower age groups. So more literate lexicons have fewer morphological forms. And the superliterate lexicon is the least diverse morphologically. And the juvenile lexicon is, of course, the most diverse. You could take it to irregularity. It's not the same thing as being regular or irregular, but in some sense, the juvenile core lexicon is, of course, it feeds on historical, classical Hebrew with all of its diverse forms. And in a sense, it's, of course, the least regular, which is what we know about the most frequent words in the language. This is what you can see here, okay? So the superliterate, educated, mature, and basic, and the lesser the register scale, okay, the more morphological forms. And this is something that we did not expect, and I'm very happy about that. Now, one other thing that we learned is that there are two things that you need to know if you want to learn Hebrew adjectives. So this is where cognition meets morphological expression. First, you need to know about nouns. You need to know about, like if you look at the sources of most adjectives are either denominal, they come from nominal bases, or they are derived from nouns, as I said, feather, feathered, or they come from nominal patterns. So it's very important to be familiar with properties and shades of meanings of nouns. So this is how you learn adjectives, and we see that in the morphological sources of nouns, of adjectives, sorry. But then again, you also need verbal knowledge, because in fact, one other major source of Hebrew adjectives is in fact, verb patterns, okay? So all of these successful and surprising and hypnotizing and united and occasional, they all come from Hebrew verbs. Okay, so this is the main derivational machinery of Hebrew. We've known that, but it's nice to see that. So in order to gain command of adjectives, you not only need to know about nouns, you also need to know about the values of these verbs, and you can ask me about that later on. So you need, some of these adjectives have passive and causative and incative values. Now, are the old scales that we had valid? Okay, we, as I told you, we used to work by morphology as a yardstick. I think this is not very interesting. It's just saying the same thing. I mean, like the distribution of all, I mean, most of what we have is denominal or passive resultative adjectives. You can ask me about the rest. This is, I think, tedious if you are not very interested in that. So what I'll do is say the following. The internal composition of each category varies across the 5 lexicons. For example, you see E suffix denominal adjectives on almost each and every lexicon. But the kind of denominals that you find in the superliterate lexicon, like foreign-based ones, are different from the ones that you have in the lower lexicons. And I think a nice example is the katil, the AE adjective pattern, which occurs, which gives you adjectives such as ordinary and cautious and pleasant and rich and poor and young. These belong in the core lexicon. But when you go higher, the same pattern gives you things like edible and washable and useful, okay? So it depends on the kinds of meanings that you have for each adjective. So this is just the beginning of this road. So you can see that, and one last thing that we found was regarding resultative adjectives like break, broken, type, typed. Ruth Berman has worked on these much, and I have too, and I used to even teach my students that these are acquired between age 4 and 6. But what we see here, if this is correct, of course, it has to be checked, but I have other sources of evidence for that, is that resultative passive adjectives come in 2 waves. They come in the juvenile lexicon, and then they come again in the educated lexicon. In some sense, the acquisition, I think, the acquisition of the adjective lexicon might be U-shaped. So the core adjectives don't only express basic properties of external and internal domains, they are also acquired as adjectives without morphological relationships because they are not morphologically complex. And subsequently, adjectives not only diversify morphologically, but they also become more morphologically complex, and then again, at the end, what you find is adjectives which do not have, that are learned as concepts and terms. You don't think about which word they come from. In that sense, our lexicon might be U-shaped. Now, the current status of the project is that there are 4 MA theses in my research group which are underway, and each of them undertakes a different age level slot. Each of them constructs different adjective tasks, comprehension, production, etc., using pictures, without pictures in speech and writing. And I hope, based on the 5 adjective lexicons, so now we derive our items from these lexicons. That's it, thank you.
We have time for questions.
I'm quite interested in this notion of morphological complexity, especially in Semitic languages.
Right.
I wonder, I mean, has anybody studied, you might have said this earlier on and I missed it, but has anybody studied not the frequency, but the percentage of the adjective lexicon across the board, not with respect to register, that are formed with E, the E suffix?
This is the first study,
Right.
which is systematic. I've done that before. I've looked at different corpora. I constructed different tasks. But this is the first systematic study that I think might be reliable, telling you that about 40% of adjectives are denominal, which is what we found more or less in 87.
Right.
But the rest are also morphologically complex.
Well, of course, but this is the simplest morphologically complex to some extent. I mean,
not really. There is. You're talking about E.
yeah.
But
Because
it's not. It's not. No.
Because it would seem to me that knowing, you know, the present forms, every Benoni form for all the conjugations would require more cognitive effort, if you will, than, okay, the rule is you have a noun and you can smack on a...
It's just the opposite. It's just, it's a bit counterintuitive when, but it's just the opposite. The present tense Benoni forms of verbs this is something that you learn very early on. We've just completed a study on that, God knows about it. By age 3, this is machinery.
Okay, so you're talking about the acquisition, and I was interested more just like new adjectives coming in to the vocabulary in general.
When you say,
not just,
but when you say complex, this is really it's sort of paradoxical, because E suffix adjectives are not at all simplex. They look very simple in terms of structure.
They're not simple lexemes, because after all, you have the noun and then you have
that's
the...
not what they mean. No. They look very simple to make. Like you say, you take a noun, you add an E, you make some changes, morphophonological changes. I've been studying this for 20 years, and this is really a paradox. And again, you look at age of acquisition, there is no other way of doing it. Or if you wish, you can look at their distribution in texts.
Yeah.
Which you can take a look at Ravid and Zilberbuch 2003 in Journal of Child Language. What you find is that you hardly find them. Okay, you find them in expository texts, in scientific texts. You don't find them before, and it's been a paradox that I was thinking about for many years. Why is it the case? It's such simple things, and I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you why. It's like what Aronoff wrote about in 1980, and Clark before him on. It's like taking an English noun to book something.
And turning
or
it
the
into
example.
a...
You need to know all of the properties of the noun in order to be able to know what the adjective means.
Sure.
And this is not the first adjective like that I heard, at least for my own kids, wasn't before age 7. And when we look at corpora, you don't find many of them before age 14.
So I was actually thinking about heuristics for natural language processing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what looks simplex in terms of morphology might not be that simplex, whereas nonlinear morphology is well, not the morphology, I mean, in general, you can see my paper in Morphology in 2006, nonlinear morphology is acquired much earlier in Hebrew than linear morphology in terms of derivation, not inflection.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I have a question. It's not directly about this talk, but given that you're speaking about the Hebrew adjectives, and at one point you said meets cognition, I'm curious if you can enlighten us about this. In Hebrew, the adjective comes after the noun,
Yeah.
whereas in English and some other languages comes before. Is there anything? Does that mean anything for the study, as if you were to compare this to other languages?
I mean, the position of the adjective, not that I know of. I mean, like, the only thing I can think of is a large-scale project that we do have between Tel Aviv and Bar Ilan, together with a colleague of mine, Rachel Schiff, where you look at adjective inflection. That is the way, the agreement of adjectives with nouns. So you first have the noun and then you have the adjective. And sometimes when the noun, for example, in the plural, for example, levavot, hearts, and then you have to say shvurim, okay? So that is something that you can relate to. I don't even, well, to the order, okay? So you have ot and then you have im. I can tell you more about that and send you my papers regarding that. But I don't think that there is any special, if this is what you're asking, special difficulty or special facility with the placement of the adjectives. I mean, like sometimes in languages, you know, in French, they can go either way. Yes, please.
Two questions. One is why in biblical Hebrew were there no adjectives? And the second question is, what could you tell us about why the acquisition of adjectives is what it is for young children? Why is it that they only learn or start using certain adjectives at the age of 7 and so on?
These adjectives,
Yeah.
nominal adjectives. Yeah. So it's like a sort of a mirror for historical. Yeah. What happened? Well, in Hebrew, well, the question is how do you determine what is a word category? So in Hebrew, you mostly determine that by morphology. Like verbs have binyanim and nouns, they have all kinds of other structures. Now, in biblical Hebrew, I usually take Shoftim Gimel, where the people of Israel wanted to place a king over them. And Shmuel, the prophet, argues with the people of Israel, and he tells them what a king would do to them. And he would do all kinds of bad things, and would take them and make them slaves. And it's a very dramatic chapter, and there are many, I think there are maybe two adjectives. One of them is tov, good, and the other might be, I forget what. So in Hebrew was very expressive as it was, using nouns and verbs. And given that, in fact, all of the adjectives that did exist, what you would call today adjectives like good and bad, etc., they were all Beinoni, present tense verbs. Okay, in fact. So, of course, every language can express anything, and Hebrew was very expressive in biblical times. But what happened later on in medieval times, Hebrew adopted and adapted the Arabic nisba, the E. So Hebrew speakers and Arabic speakers lived for hundreds of years together in close proximity, also linguistic proximity. And this is how a sort of the class of ethnic nouns like Yevusi, Chivi, etc. grew and blossomed into what we see today, and also in Arabic. This has to do with, this is history. Now regarding your question, this is in fact what Miriam asked me. The nominal adjectives that end with E, in fact require that we know a lot about the noun from which they are derived. In general, to put it like this, to put it very simply, what we know about child language acquisition is that at first children use the most prominent forms, that is, the form that directly reflects what they want to say. derived forms, that is, for example, nominalization instead of verbs, anything which comes from another category is always more difficult. And of course, you can say these are mostly abstract, mental adjectives, etc. But this is not, they use a few words such as chagigi, festive, in kindergartens, dati, religious, that's it, more or less. I mean, like 3 or 4, like retzini, serious. Otherwise, these adjectives don't really occur in the input that they hear, but of course this has a reason. Again, because you need to talk about nouns in a roundabout way. Yes, please, Dan.
Toddlers invent idiosyncratic adjectives. Well, what devices do they use in Hebrew to do that?
Idiosyncratic adjectives, they use, well, first and foremost, they use the Beinoni as is. And that is something like, at buba mechabeket, you are a hagi, a doll. So just using the word mechabeket, which is the Beinoni form. And then later on, what they do is they start doing the E thing in a funny way. Like I remember my son, the example that I remember, my son dragging me throughout the mall before it was open and saying, "Hayiti ילד מאוד סבלנותי." I was a very patient-C child. So that would be another form I remember a fantastic example of my nephew at the age of 4. He fell off his bicycle and his mother laughed at him. He fell and he said, "היה לי צחוק בכתי." I had a cryingy laughter. Or laughter. So but it takes time to learn to say these things, of course, because then you have to talk about the properties of objects or things.
But you said that was at 4?
That was as 4, yeah. I do remember my son telling me, this is Ezor Harari, mountainous area, but not, you should say Harari. There is a morphophonological aspect here which I haven't talked about, but morphophonology isn't the problem. The semantics, I think, is the problem.
Question about the distribution of the levels or registers. Are you, in terms of the validity of these measures, does it disturb you that there's such a big chunk in the middle?
You mean like the 33%?
Yeah.
No, I think to my ear and to my heart, it sounds very plausible, because think about that. We know that the core lexicon of kids is small. It is. This is what we know. They don't know many words. And let me put it like this. What we know about kids from age 11 to 13 is that their lexicon in Hebrew at least doubles. It doubles with nominalized forms, tzachak, tzchok, bacha, bechi, darach, dricha, that is nouns derived from verbs. At the very same time, and we know it from other studies, they start doing nouns, adjectives which are derived from nouns. So in fact, derivational complexity in that sense arrives around the time that you would have the mature or literate lexicons. So it rings a very true bell to me, but we have to validate this with the tasks that we are undertaking now. But the numbers, I would have been very surprised if the superliterate lexicon would have been, larger, or the core lexicon, because this is not the way, this is not how language acquisition works.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.